for you guys, for our neighbors up to the north. Jared Harman is an entrepreneur, digital strategist, and CEO and co-founder of the One Group Agency, an elite full-service creative agency and digital marketing firm based in Fraser Valley. Under his leadership, the One Group Agency has positioned itself as a social-first by design powerhouse, building custom brand identities, high-converting digital funnels, and scroll-stopping visual content across social media, connected TV, and e-commerce platforms. Jared recently made major waves in the regional marketing landscape by orchestrating the successful acquisition of Bower House, a highly respected boutique marketing firm. The merger significantly expanded his agency's footprint, scaling the collective's capabilities and talent pool. Deeply committed to an ethos where strategy equals execution, Jared treats his agency not as an outside vendor, but as a seamless, high-touch extension of a brand's internal team. Jared, thanks so much, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Looking forward to it.
Cool, man. Well, I know gave a little us back. We could take up where study and what got you into the marketing and advertising world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, born and raised in Vancouver, BC, Canada. So West Coast kid. Yeah, went to the University of British Columbia. Was originally going there to play hockey, but decided I'd rather have some fun instead, which I didn't, and probably had a fairly large impact on the study part. Didn't do a whole lot of studying. I guess you could say I got into marketing in about second month of first year university. It was by trying to grow that network, and for all the wrong reasons, but it was a lot of fun. So. But prior to that, I had kind of spent most of my life in hospitality. My family owned a pretty big restaurant chain. And when I say like my extended family, so my like great aunts and uncles. At one point, there was 108 locations over the west coast of Canada, which was
wow.
Cool. Yeah, so I started working in the family biz when I was 11, and it kind of stayed in hospitality, through university, like a lot of kids do, making some money and just trying to get through and have some cash in the pocket. But I was always kind of, or I've always been referred to as kind of like a natural sales and marketing guy, like just kind of out there, social, doing that kind of stuff. And then always wanted to work in sports. So like sports was always, it was kind of one of those things when I was in my teens and I realized I wasn't going to make it in sports as an athlete. I was like, hey, well, how else can I get there? And landed a job doing play-by-play for a junior hockey team. And that didn't pay anything. So they said, hey, if you want to be our marketing guy, we'll pay you a salary. So I jumped at it, and the rest is kind of history. Just, I was fortunate to get paired up with some people who had a lot of experience in the business, and it didn't take long to figure out like that was a much better path for me than broadcasting, and a lot more opportunity there for sure. And then it's kind of been plugging away at that ever since.
Very cool. So where did you go from working for the hockey team to kind of diving in as an entrepreneur, wanting to build your own shop?
Yeah, so I went from working for the hockey team, that kind of transitioned into a multi-sport venue facility, which really gave me my business background. Like I was put in charge of the facility and specifically the business operations, which was 8 years of experience. That was just fantastic. Like I said, learned a lot of the back end stuff, admin, all the stuff that nobody wants to do, finance, HR, all that kind of jazz. And then after 8 years there, I went back to hospitality as a director of marketing. But in between that transition, I invested in a couple opportunities that was kind of like, a few buddies. We were going to try to do these startups, and both of them were absolute disasters, but it lost a ton of money. It was, a ton of fun, so they say. And, but it kind of gave me that little taste of what it was like owning my own business and doing what I wanted to do. And the lesson I learned from both those opportunities was, if I'm going to do something, I got to do it in something that I know and I understand. And that, like, the natural fit there was marketing for me. So, so in 2018, started the agency with a good buddy of mine and somebody I'd worked with in the past, Matt Bork, and started as just like a two-man team. Like he was doing all the content, I was doing all the social, and just kind of really organically grew, over the years. Now we're at 16 full-time staff and clients around the world. So, it's been an interesting journey for sure.
A lot of agencies start as partnerships or a handful of people. What was it about Matt that you were like, okay, I want to get married to you in business? And, a lot of people don't realize like people you work with or friends or colleagues, like you never quite know what it's like until you go into partnership with somebody. So what is most important about, finding a partner for launching something as specific as an agency? And what do you look for where you're equally yoked, so to speak, bringing different things to the table? Like what was in that relationship that made you want to go into business with Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing, and it probably goes without saying, is trust, right? Like, you want to be in business with someone that you can trust. I mean, even if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, at least you know that that person's not going to try to knife you in the back on the way out the door or whatever, right? I think that's a big thing. And I mean, Matt's probably one of the best people I've ever met, and so there's definitely no concerns there. The second thing is, especially when you're starting like a small shop, like you need to cover your bases, right? So like it was a really good fit in that sense. Like what he brought to the table was entirely different than what I brought to the table. And even though I would say we both have like a similar, value set in terms of like how we look at things, both have different ideas for how we, accomplish our goals. And both of us have good networks of, potential clients and people that we could reach out to and, we were able to utilize to grow the business. So in a lot of ways, it was like a perfect storm and perfect partnership. And it hasn't always, even when we started, there was a third partner. To your point, it doesn't always work out. But even through some of that change, that Matt's been the one that's kind of remained true, which has been great.
Love it. You've called yourself an agency that's social first by design. Social media is obviously a huge part of how we do branding and marketing and communications these days. But what was it that made you guys want to lean in to social as kind of your, primary way of telling stories, or at least, thinking about campaign design from a social first perspective?
Yeah, I think when we first started talking about it, we were trying to figure out, okay, like where's the opportunity, for an agency right now. And the big thing that we thought, and saw was that, at least in Vancouver, there was and still is like a lot of big dogs out there in terms of the agencies, like the ones that are high end, working with the big brands. And at that time in 2018, like obviously, the world was kind of already shifted, but if it wasn't already shifted, it was shifting to, like you need to be online and, have a pretty stable presence. And what wasn't around was agencies, or an agency that had, approachable price points and the ability to work with small, medium, or even to startup businesses and deliver good content. So I think that was where the concept started, to try to build like a strong organic brand. I think, one of the most common questions, and again, probably not too surprising, is like, well, what makes you guys different about your content and what you do? And it's kind of a hard thing to answer. Like this part of me that thinks nothing really. Like there's a lot of great agencies out there. They all do really good work. It's going to come down to how much you can afford and who you like working with. Like that's the honest answer. But I think trying to approach everything from like a storytelling standpoint and like, really trying to make our clients realize that, there's a lot of people that have that product or that service. So what you really need to do is find a way to connect with your audience on a more natural, real level. And that's always like been how we've positioned ourselves and trying to focus on actual stories and not just, glitz and glamour that can sometimes come along with content production.
You recently acquired Bower House. What was it about, wanting to start moving into the M&A game? Was there something about Bower House that was exciting to you from a capabilities perspective? What was it that kind of got you on the M&A path, and why Bower House?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, I wouldn't say we are on that M&A path. It was just a unique opportunity, quite honestly. They were originally branded as Colony Digital, and they launched around the same time we did. And prior to that, we had actually, like a smaller group of what became that agency had worked with us in some different areas. So there was some familiarity there with the owners. The primary owners were moving out of town, and we're looking to find someone to potentially take over the business that they felt comfortable with in terms of like taking care of their staff and their clients. So it was a really unique opportunity. We definitely weren't on the lookout for anything like that, and it wasn't something that was on our radar. But to answer your question about what appealed to us with them, I mean, obviously they had a great client book. I think they expanded our network and portfolio in a way that would have been really difficult for us to do in a short period of time. So it was almost like skipping a few steps in the process in that sense, because unlike us, they were really focused on some of those bigger brands when they launched. They went after the big brands, we went after the small brands, and so it wasn't like we were. It was interesting because we were never really in competition, as odd as that sounds. We were kind of living in different worlds. But I mean, the most important thing and the most interesting thing about them to us was their team. Like they had a super talented roster of people that, again, not only would add to our team, but also complement our existing team. They had some whether it be, John Spooner and Matt Bourne, who two of the content creators that came over, or some of the project managers that came, that like they were just, it was almost like Tetris where they were just filling in some blocks for us that we didn't have and didn't have access to. So it was a very natural fit in that sense.
Was the merging kind of sometimes when agencies come together, are tools, processes, creative philosophies, ways of doing things that need to be merged together, and or one company's way of doing things maybe becomes the model moving forward. How was the merging and kind of the culture and the process coming together?
That part was tough at first, especially I think not surprisingly, like we both had our own idea. I mean, we both had our own vision and ideas for how we wanted things to work and how we thought they should work. I think for us a little bit easier in the sense that it probably goes without saying we were in the driver's seat a little bit on some of that stuff, but sure. Whereas I'm sure if you were to give that group truth serum, they felt like they were at the disadvantage, and it was never intended to be that way, but that's just the optics of it when one gets acquired, right? We went from like 10 people to 26 overnight, which was like, that in itself was like a big eye opener, and just like it just totally shifted the dynamic of how we operate and like how we organize ourselves. Not in a bad way. It just changed like the day-to-day significantly. But I think the one thing, I think to our credit, we knew that we had some deficiencies, from an infrastructure standpoint, especially. And we knew that they had some, operational systems in place that we needed. And I think, similarly, I think that their team knew that we provided a different outlook on how to, generate new business and do some things that maybe that they were restricted in before. So I think, after a couple of months of, standing on the other end of the dance floor, like we kind of figured out that this could work pretty well. And then there was the whole, I think there was obviously some redundancies, like, there were duplication of roles and things like that. So we had to kind of weed through some of that stuff, which was never fun. Like, doesn't matter which side of the equation people are moving on from. It's tough in either end. So it took some time, but I think we were able to get it to a point where we have it now, where we have a really, strong team that all complement each other well and all fit together well.
Very cool. You rebranded the agency at one point as well. You originally were called Search and Rescue, and you rebranded as the One Group. What was it that you thought about where needing to, kind of rebrand the agency identity, and what does the brand represent of the One Group agency?
Yeah, I mean, the real reason for that was we had moved on from one of the partners, so the third partner that I kind of referenced earlier. So when we launched the agency in 2018, we were very, very directly connected to another business that he had owned, and it was a great thing, and it was a great opportunity for us. But as we grew, like I kind of felt like we had outgrown that connection, but people still kind of assumed that we were just like a supplemental brand of theirs, which again, not a bad thing. I felt we had, accomplished more to be viewed as more, if that makes sense. And so then when the, discussion came to kind of go for Matt and I to go our own way, at first we didn't want to change the brand because, obviously we had spent, 6 years in, with that brand as kind of everything that we did and who we were. But as that process moved forward, it looked like maybe that would be the easiest thing to do. And then we started to kind of say, hey, like this might be an opportunity to clean slate it a little bit. And, I think the deciding factor was going to be whether we could come up with something that we thought was more representative of who we are. And, believe it or not, we had actually, and we've received quite a bit of, not blowback's a strong word, but like there's a lot of people that didn't understand the name Search and Rescue. There's a lot of people, we actually, after we rebranded, had quite a few people reach out and say, I didn't want to admit that I was working with an agency that had to like rescue me, which I always like, I think you're being too literal there, but fair enough. Like, I guess, like it would seem like there was like, over analyzing the name, but, when we were going through the process of considering other names, Matt had suggested the name One Group. And, I in a lot of ways, it perfectly, summarized who we are and what we do. Like I think, I take a lot of pride in the fact that we've had, most of our staff for a long time. We do operate in, very cliche, but like a family type way. And we all get along. We're very, cohesive that way. And then on top of that, and probably more importantly, like we are like a one-stop shop. Like everything's in-house. You can, we are one group that kind of does everything. So there's a lot of reasons to like it. And then, I always thought the abbreviation of OG was kind of cool too. So, cause we're two old guys who own and run a marketing agency. Right. So, so they just seemed like a perfect fit, and just kind of fell in love with it when Matt suggested it. And then the rest is kind of history there. So.
I love it. You recently published a piece on being beyond noise and creating content that actually performs. As we move into this era of AI where, everybody can kind of confident at an infinite speed, velocity, low cost. How do you find impactful content versus the scale content quickly, fast? And how do you ensure that it converts to revenue?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be clear. Like, I think there's value in both. Like I think there's like a necessary evil that comes with like content frequency and just being able to turn stuff out. I think, for better or worse, like the world we're in kind of demands that to some extent. But I think that one of the criticisms of AI that is true is that like unless you know what you're doing with it, unless you spend the time with it, you don't necessarily get the best results with it. And so that's where producing like quality content that has really well thought out and strategic messaging and intentions will actually make a difference, right? I mean, and those are, I think, I think in a well-rounded marketing strategy for a business, you find a place for both pieces, and find a way to maximize both lanes, if you will, to get the most out of your efforts, right? I think that's where a lot of businesses probably miss the mark because they spend so much time focusing on one or the other. And like one of the things I'll say to a lot of clients is to try not to overthink it. Like everything's so quick and it's all about instant gratification and all those kind of things. Like everything you produce is only going to live for really 30 seconds for most people if you're lucky, right? So spending 30 days trying to figure out what 30-second piece of content you need to produce is probably a waste of time. And so you got to find that balance, right? And understand and be willing to try and test different things, as opposed to just and then that's where we've seen a shift. And everybody, I mean, our clients have too, where when we started, it was all about that high end, like, cinematic content and trying to, get, beautify your product or your service. Whereas now it's, people want raw and authentic and real content more than they do the quick and dirty.
I love it. You've also stated that attention is a currency. When you look at platforms like TikTok and Meta right now, what do you think is the biggest mistake that brands are doing, trying to buy attention rather than earning it organically?
Yeah, I think it's funny too, because with all the different studies or just all the information and data out there that illustrates this point, but like there's not as much value in the numbers as people think, and like it's It's really the engagement levels and the attention that's worth something, right? Because I actually just had a good buddy of mine yesterday whose business, he had this really random post on Instagram, had nothing to do with the business. Like, I don't want to say go viral, but like as far as they're concerned, it went viral. Like the biggest response I've ever had from any post, had nothing to do with it. And I said, yeah, like it's great. Like you got 700 followers from one post and like all these things. Like it looks good on paper, but like how many of those people are ever going to step foot in your business or purchase something online from you? And the answer is probably, if you're lucky, two, right? And it's so like, again, I think people need to stop focusing on the volume and looking at the interactions, and it's almost like taking that old version of how many people walk through your storefront today and see like how many people and talk to somebody, how many people actually like hit your profiles or your channels and actually like interacted with you. I think that's where the value is. And you get so much information jammed in front of you every day, on whatever platform you spend your time on. How much of that, going back to the attention part, like how much of that actually resonates with people and actually connects. And like, I think, to take that one step further, and again, don't get me wrong, there's value, like tons of value in the conversions, but like, I don't think people should underestimate the value and like the subtle brand awareness that those ads can create. And like, not everybody is going to respond to what they see in front of them and like go purchase that shirt or those shoes or, make that reservation. But if you can grow your brand so that the next time they are looking to do that thing, they think of your brand, like that's where the value is.
Yeah, you kind of need that recall for when somebody's in market for your product, they think of you first versus your competitor. There are so many products or services that we buy where, the need isn't immediate, but it's like, who do we trust and who do we like when that opportunity does come up is just as important as like kind of the direct response stuff.
Yeah. I mean, like, if I'm scrolling through Instagram right now, like, on a Wednesday afternoon, like there's nothing I need to be buying. Right. So the odds that somebody's going to catch my eye and be like, yep, need to buy that right this second is, it better be like a smoking deal that like that I can't miss or some sort of opportunity that will never come again. Otherwise the plays there about, making sure I'm hitting the audience with something that when it is time to buy that, or I am in that mindset, I will remember where I saw that and go back to it.
You've also recently noted the idea that exceptional customer service is the foundation for great client partnerships. You always think about these, consumer brands like Zappos or Nordstrom's who really use customer service as kind of the engine behind not only their brand, but their word of mouth marketing. People talked about them because their customer service was not only exceptional, but they went above and beyond and it became a point for storytelling and like brand love. I hadn't thought about it as much from the context of B2B. Can you talk about that idea of why you think that customer service is kind of an unlock for the agency world in which you're able to establish great client partnerships, but also being mindful that, projects can sometimes drift out of scope. Timelines aren't always adhered to. What are the internal boundaries that you establish to make sure your clients feel supported, but you don't, suffocate your internal team?
Yeah, I think, I said it earlier where like there's a lot of options out there for the services that we provide, whether it be other agencies, freelancers, software-based platforms that like allow you to do that stuff. And so like there's no shortage of skilled people out there that can create, content or manage social media. And I think pretending to say that we're the best at A, B, C, D, or E, like, I just don't buy into that. I mean, I think we're pretty damn good. Don't get me wrong, but I think there's a lot of other people that are pretty damn good too. And so I think when I think about how I've had any success in my career, it's been about building relationships and building trust with clients. And that's what customer service is to me is like knowing that we have their back as much as they'd expect their own staff to have their back, and really trying to build ourselves into being an extension of their team. I think it's kind of I don't want to like age myself necessarily, but I think, you know, the way the world is now, everything's digital. And when I say everything, I mean communication. Like, not a lot of people pick up the phone anymore and do those types of things, right? So I think, you know, by doing that and you know, ensuring that there's some face-to-face connection, you know, it goes a long way, and people appreciate that now, you know. And I always use the story when I first started working for the hockey team as like the sales and marketing guy. You know, I would try to get to know the people who were buying rink boards and, you know, buying ads off us. And I used to joke, like, you know, these businesses, like, I don't know if they're getting any value from what they were buying, but I think there was an element at play where they're like, you know, Jared's a nice kid, and, you know, it's only $2,000 and we can afford it. And like, we like being part of the community. And I don't want to tell Jared that we're not doing it anymore because he's a nice kid. And like, it's, you know, it's kind of the same thing with the agency. Like, you know, if they know that we're working our ass off for them and doing the best we can, and, you know, we'll be there on a Saturday night at 9 o'clock if something goes sideways on their social. You know, I think that, you know, creates a lot of, you know, equity, if you will, you know, with our clients. You know, and to the comment about boundaries with the staff, like, obviously, you know, mindful of that. But I think that just comes back to like the environment you create in the office and with the team. And like, that's more of a give and take. Like, you know, obviously if, you know, clients are calling staff like every day or every weekend, like after hours, like there's other issues there. And that probably comes down to like, you know, planning and processing on our part. But, you know, if it's only, you know, if it's very sporadic and only, you know, once in a while, or only when it's a real emergency, I think most of our team is pretty good about it. And they know that, you know, hey, they'll get that time back somewhere else if needed, right? Like, you know, to go watch their kid play their sports or whatever it is that they maybe need to cut out early for, or whatever is going on in their life.
You've also talked about the idea that strategy equals execution, operating under a core equation. You take over a brand that has a really beautiful visual identity, but they don't really have an infrastructure for thinking about conversions. Where's the first place in diagnosing the funnel leak? Where do you look for to transition a brand that's got good aesthetics and really quite have a funnel figure?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that aesthetics is very different than messaging, right? And you know, you could have this, you know, beautiful brand with, you know, great imagery or video or you know, or just design. But I think one of the hardest things for brands to do is like pull themselves out of their own nest, if you will. And you know, when you're building a brand on your own, you're obviously very emotionally attached to that brand. And so sometimes it's hard to look at things from 30,000 feet or from where your potential customers sit. And so I think, and like, that's where the messaging can get lost. And that's usually, and beyond the messaging, it could just be process too. Like, you know, click-throughs and like the transaction itself and like what it takes to get from A to B. And I think that minutia is a lot of times where clients will get lost, because to them, they understand it, right? Like they know how to get from A to B on their own website. They understand what all of their copy says and means. They understand what all their imagery, you know, describes and means, and so forth and so on. And I find more often than not, clients have a hard time separating themselves from that to look at it from who their, you know, ideal customer is. And that's where we can provide value, because that's the one advantage to not knowing their business, is we can look at it and say, hey, like, if we're going to be buying this is what we're trying to figure out. Right. And, you know, and like, I don't have any allegiance to the brand. So I'm looking at it strictly from a customer standpoint. Now, delivering that message can be tough sometimes, but, you know, again, I try to look at it like if they're at our table talking to us about it, they must realize something's not working. So hopefully they're open to that conversation.
You know, being an agency that kind of starts through the lens of social, there's a lot of conversation around these days around paid media and organic creative. Essentially, the algorithm is giving agencies and brands a real-time laboratory to experiment with content. Every piece of content gets the opportunity, at least, like you said, to go viral in the world of maybe your client that got 900 new followers. You know, for some reason, that particular piece of creative resonated enough, generated enough engagement to kind of give them the boost they needed to achieve liftoff, so to speak, and get out of orbit into the earned bucket. How do you work with your creative directors and media buyers to kind of have that real-time finger on the pulse of organic social, then selecting which assets should get paid budgets behind them, and creating a feedback loop with your creative team on what to create next?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, but I think, I mean, as you said, like the data's there, right? So I think it's really just actually monitoring performance and like paying attention to the different trends and what's happening online will usually drive those decisions and directions. It's the beauty of it now is it's not hard to see like what's working and what isn't working, and there's real numbers and real information. It's not a guessing game. You can actually take an analytical look, and if you know how to use AI properly, you can have AI do it for you. So to give you some of that feedback, and then it's just about being nimble enough to respond to it and make those adjustments. I would say that like the primary challenge usually for clients in that sense is budget, right? Because there's only so much content that they can create or time and money that they can put into it. And that's probably where the limitations would come, because at some point you're going to cap out in terms of like, okay, I can create, you can only create so many assets to A/B test, organically or paid, right? And you don't always have this endless budget to create new content when something's not performing, even though there's a clear answer to what is performing. But I think it's really just trying to make the time, I think realistically weekly, to review like how the content we're creating is performing for our clients, and actually analyzing, why it is or isn't working, and trying to find those little niches where, or little things that we've hit on or missed on to better the next round.
You guys decided to build up your agent Fraser Valley. You've got a dominant presence in the region through acquisition, but then there are also brands like I mentioned. Sometimes thinking like, oh, and if an agency isn't in Vancouver or Toronto or some of these bigger cities, that brings a certain shade to the relationship or the agency credentials. But then we're also living in this world where talent wants to live, they want to live because of lifestyle, ability, etc. Be curious, how do you build a agency presence outside of like a major metro that Canada is kind of known for?
Yeah, look, I find that super ironic, I guess, because freelancers, as an example, don't designate a location. They're just anywhere and everywhere, right? And it's really no different for us. Full disclosure, like our office is located 2 blocks from my house because I'm the one who uses the office the most. It's most convenient for me. And so, and I had said to the team for the most part, right? But it's also why they're not here most of the time. Like, they're only here a couple of days a week because it's not as convenient for them, right? And so, it's funny because the office is such a minor part of it, and like to spend triple the amount of money to be in a metro, like in a downtown, area just doesn't make sense from a business standpoint, especially when the world's so mobile now. I think, to answer your question though, I would say I think the easiest way to do it is just showcase work that we've done elsewhere, or for major brands, or even small brands that show an understanding of different markets and different audiences. And because again, going back to the data, like you don't need to live in New York or wherever to understand what the audience there might be looking for. Like that information exists out there, and it's about whether you've done your homework or your preparation to get ready for whatever that project is, that'll separate you, right? And I think as marketers and like people who are being asked to be responsible for a variety of different brands, like that's our responsibility to make sure we do that work and understand where it is we're going and what we're trying to accomplish there.
We're in a unique moment in marketing. The marketing tent poles were right smack dab in the middle of World Cup fever. You being a sports guy and World Cup being kind of one of those opportunities for the North American market to together as a whole. United States, Canada, and Mexico were the global stage where people are coming in from around the world around this shared passion of sport and soccer, especially in, the last maybe year or two, where relationships between Canada and US and maybe frayed a little bit. I know we're getting a lot less travelers from you guys, and there's a lot of rhetoric out there. But how do you see a moment like World Cup as an opportunity for clients to maybe brands to market on the world stage and kind of think of North America as this larger family versus kind of these disparate countries and regions, which of course they are, but we also have a hemisphere in common and a shared passion around soccer.
I gotta be honest, I don't know that I've considered North America to be a family so much over the last couple of years, just with the way everything's been. But I mean, I do think what these events do create is an opportunity to find, an expanded audience, around whatever it is you're trying to promote, because it's one of those, it's like the Olympics or whatever the case may be, where, more people than ever are paying attention to what's happening around a specific event, and I think, World Cup might be, the largest next to, or maybe more than the Olympics in that sense, where there's this, finite timeline of like eyeballs and audience like dedicated to this sport. Even people that don't really watch or follow soccer seem to be somewhat invested, at least. And I think that creates this chance to do some different things and because the reality of it is, unless you've got like huge bucks, like you're not going to be a part of the World Cup as a brand, right? Like you've got to have big dollars to play in that game. But where digital marketing presents itself to be create an opportunity, like that post I was talking about was actually a World Cup schedule, it was and it was like, it wasn't even like that nice, like it wasn't like some like crazy cool graphic. It was like I kind of said to my buddy, maybe it was because it was like a really simple, easy to understand schedule that like people could repurpose, that it blew up. Because like you see a lot of, again, going back to my earlier comment about overthinking, a lot of people trying to create these like crazy graphics and all these cool ways to present the schedule. And this was like, it almost looked like it was done in Excel. And his business is a restaurant, and I wouldn't call it a place where anybody goes to watch sports. It's more of like a not fine dining, but a higher end place. Like they don't have the TVs on usually. So like there's just no, there's no logic behind it. It made no sense. But again, it kind of goes to show you that you find some weird little niche that maybe people were looking for, and because they were looking for soccer, you kind of tapped into it, and then that blew up a little bit, and it just became it presented an opportunity that otherwise would never be there, right? And because the only thing that would be comparable would be local professional sports, but even then, like that audience is limited, right? And now you've opened yourself up to the world in that sense. Now, again, I question like how many people are actually going to show up at the restaurant from that post, but it still was, a cool thing for them, and a one-off marketing win, which is good. So I think going back to the original question, I think it just presents an opportunity to find different ways to get in front of different people that might not normally or regularly exist.
I love it. Well, awesome, man. Well, Jared, really appreciate you hopping on and spending a little bit of time with our audience. If folks at home want to follow along with your thought leadership or learn more about the agency, where would you like to send people to learn more?
Yeah, best place is our website, onegroupagency.ca. Everything you need to know or how to get in touch, you can find there for sure.
Awesome, man. Well, appreciate you spending some time with us today. For those of home, if you're watching the show for the first time, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe. If you're listening, an honest review on a podcast platform that you're listening on is how we find a larger audience. So don't forget to do that. And if there's somebody out there, marketer who's thinking about social first concepts, branding, campaign ideas, maybe an entrepreneur who would benefit from the conversation that I had with Jared today about different types of utility of social content, going after audience versus engagement, chasing some of these strategies, or just somebody who you think would enjoy the show, don't forget to share. And with that, I'll wish you a great day, man. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate you.
Yeah. Thanks for the time, Dylan.
All right. See you, bud.